Okay, this is our lecture on other conditions that may be the focus of clinical attention. This is a group of clinical issues that are listed in the DSM that are sometimes referred to as Z codes. You may still sometimes hear old language from the DSM-4 where they were listed as V codes. The Z refers to the letter that comes before each of the codes. Many of these codes are not reimbursable by third-party payers. Yet they're really important to take into account when making a diagnosis because they often, when included, provide a richer, more nuanced picture of what's going on for an individual. Someone might have a diagnosable mental health issue and then have on their plate a number of different kind of psychosocial stressors that are impacting the depression, impacting their capacity to function, exacerbating or even perhaps maintaining symptoms that are important to include. If you imagine, for example, someone with major depressive disorder who is having a hard time functioning, um, if the diagnosis that's written only includes the diagnosis of major depressive disorder, the assumption would be that there may not necessarily be stressors associated with it. But when Z codes are included, um, it really does support a more nuanced sort of perspective and sort of creates a more thorough picture of what's going on clinically. Additionally, these are codes that are really important to consider among individuals who occupy sort of a disadvantaged social status. For example, individuals with from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to face psychosocial stressors that could certainly exacerbate and even lead to mental health diagnoses. So we're just going to walk through these rather quickly, just kind of mentioning some of what they are. So there's a whole category of relational problems, which include problems in the family for children, other problems related to primary social support, child maltreatment and neglect, and adult maltreatment and neglect. There are educational and occupational problems. Educational problems include things like just difficulties in the classroom that require perhaps a need for an IEP. Occupational problems can include things like military deployment status, could also include just general problems related to employment, lack of employment, difficulties on the job. Housing and economic problems, including things like homelessness and inadequate housing. Um, and when it comes to economic problems, things like extreme poverty, lack of um, healthy food and clean water. Other problems related to social environment, things like phase of life problems. These are kind of developmental issues that occur across the lifespan that don't really represent pathology, but represent a bit of an adjustment that is taking place for the individual. You might have a situation where, for example, a dad is experiencing empty nest syndrome as his child goes off to college. This could be considered a phase of life problem, developmentally typical, occurs for many individuals who have children who go off to college. If the diagnosis of, say, adjustment disorder did not fit, phase of life problem could be applied. Also, individuals who are perhaps adjusting to retirement, another phase of life problem. Difficulties with acculturation for individuals who are belong to a minority culture living in a majority culture context. Issues of social exclusion and rejection. This is not a comprehensive list, but some important ones to mention here. Social exclusion and rejection can include things like experiences with homophobia or experiences with transphobia, things of that nature. Problems related to interactions with the legal system, so we can document being the victim of a crime. We can document imprisonment or incarceration, also problems related to release from prison, issues of adjustment. Now, I'm not listing the actual codes here, but each of these does have a specific code. I just want to mention that so you keep that in mind. Problems related to other psychosocial, personal, and environmental circumstances. Religious or spiritual problem where someone is having a bit of a spiritual crisis or a problem related to spirituality or religion in some way, maybe experiencing really intense doubts about maybe a faith tradition that they were raised in, maybe having difficulties converting to another religion if that's something that the person is choosing to do for themselves or for family members, things of that nature. Victim of terrorism or torture, exposure to disaster, war, or other hostilities. So this this latter one, exposure to disaster, war, and other hostilities, with the recent fires here in Sonoma County in the last couple of years, this would be a very applicable Z code for many individuals coming in for services. Other circumstances of personal history, things like difficulties and problems related to access to quality health care, like inaccessibility to good health care. We can also document non-adherence to medical treatment. You maybe, for example, are working with someone who has major depressive disorder and diabetes. And the person, maybe when they get depressed, stops taking their insulin and eats a diet that is really is high in sugar and really problematic for the diabetes diagnosis. We could think in terms of non-adherence to medical treatment. It can also include things like if the person is maybe overweight and has been given recommendations by their primary care provider about a specific diet that they should follow. It can be a way of documenting. And the point here, these are all issues that we as mental health providers can provide assistance and support. Helping someone with their diabetic medication adherence is something that we can help with. Helping someone to kind of plan for a healthy lifestyle, to work with their doctor's dietary intake recommendations, something we can help with. It's within our scope as mental health practitioners. So just some of the things that we might consider in terms of interventions, thinking a bit about, just initially in terms of understanding, just even using these Z codes is really about kind of taking a deeply psychosocial perspective on clients presenting concerns, including in the work, just close attention to psychosocial factors, helping clients, working with clients, eliciting from clients does their psychosocial landscape look like, where are the areas that they're having difficulty, where they're having a hard time kind of getting needs met, getting quality services, having access to resources that they might not necessarily have available. In this way, there's a kind of case management quality to some of the work that we can involve ourselves in with clients who are faced with a lot of psychosocial stressors. And really, it's work that we should be doing. And I've mentioned, you have probably heard me talk about the importance of really, wherever you are working, really knowing really well what the resources are in your area for individuals so that you can make really good referrals and follow up with clients on those referrals. So we think about case management, referral, and follow-up. We think about kind of clinical problem-solving approaches, assertiveness training, communication skills, processing feelings about psychosocial stressors, helping clients with kind of stress management skill development, and kind of supporting the process of coping with particular stressors. Validating and normalizing client reactions to psychosocial stressors. All of the Z codes are very real stressors that would for any of us make us feel overwhelmed and kind of tapped out in terms of internal resources. And so really normalizing and validating that these feelings that you have in response to the situation are very normal and really valid. And then advocacy work, which can range, I mentioned here, for example, letter writing. Oftentimes our clients need us to, with their permission and with their consent, of course, to advocate on their behalf. And so thinking about the appropriate use of our scope and the appropriate use of our power to support clients with getting needs met. This could be things like supporting clients with documentation around disability, if they're applying for disability, or if a particular client, say, thinking of a particular individual that I worked with who um, had PTSD, was living in a roommate situation. It was a supported housing situation, and had still not reached a place with his PTSD where he was very well able to control and manage his anger. And so he would have angry outbursts and with his roommates, which of course was distressing to his roommates, understandably. But it got to a point where it was risking his housing. And so we discussed together that we would write a letter, basically, that I would write a letter that he approved of, that I had him read before I sent it, that basically said that the anger is something that we're really working on, documenting the progress that he had made, and really kind of documenting my belief that this was something, my professional opinion, that this was something that he could gain some more control over with a little bit more time. And the letter was really supportive to the client. I think it was helpful on multiple levels. I think on one level, just reading a letter written by me, someone he knows cares about him and whose opinion he values, kind of seeing my perspective on his situation, my perspective on his anger, and the hope that I hold for him to kind of manage that better moving forward. I think it was positively had a positive impact for him in that regard, as well as it was useful to his case manager, who was also advocating for him to be able to maintain his housing in the supported housing situation. So things like that, the various ways in which clients do need us to use our power appropriately, um, with their expressed permission and their expressed desire, for us to do so. So just a quick little lecture on these Z codes that I hope you will, always look to in the DSM when considering diagnosis with future clients.